everyone. Broadcast on the 2017 model uh, Volvo VNL with the Volvo D13 engine with the Allison Transmission. To a reminder, anybody on Steam we're going to have the release Arkansas ULP on Monday, September 16th. And so, so be sure to have your money ready. And it's going to be exciting when I get out of here and stuff. It's going to be for Arkansas, Latina. So that is going to be released on the 16th. So consider to have your money ready. For that, we're going to start with 2010 Wyoming. So let's go get the used packaging from Power Channel. Let's all get doing.
Okay, here we go. Turn left.
Whatever energy you're using now just to go do a Google search, multiply that energy, push on the grid by 5. That's all $30 million. That genie's at the bottom.
Texas voters approved of Proposition 7 during last year's election, which Patrick says will provide an incentive for new power plants in Texas. Critics of the proposition have said it won't make a difference because it won't have an immediate impact. I'm Patricia Ortiz, News 88.7.
Astros baseball this afternoon. They fell to the
Turn
Reds
right.
in Cincinnati 1-0. We have a 50% chance of rain tonight, low near 76. I'm Gail DeLauder, News 88.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Americans United for Separation of Church and State. For more than 75 years, AU has supported freedom without favor and equality without exception. Learn more at au.org/NPR.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. Project 2025. You've probably heard about it. It is a roadmap from the Conservative Heritage Foundation for the next Republican president. And it has been a major talking point for Democrats on the campaign trail. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has tried to disavow it, tried to distance himself. Well, NPR White House correspondent Franco Ordonez covers the Trump campaign. He's with me now to dig in on the controversy. Hi, Franco.
Hi, Mary Louise.
Just go straight to the heart of Project 2025. What is this all about? Why is it so controversial?
It's effectively a transition in waiting run by some of Trump's closest allies from his first presidency. And it really dates back to his disastrous first transition back in 2016. When he took office, he was widely criticized for being unprepared. Trump actually picked former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie to make the plans, but Trump tossed all that work out when he was elected, and they really had to start from scratch.
Okay, so this is designed to avoid that scenario again, to actually have a plan should he have a second term?
Exactly. His allies didn't want that to happen again if he wins a second term. So they got to work, and they got to work well before even the primaries, drafting plans for the next, quote, conservative heralded the project's demise when one of the main top editors stepped down. But really, the work was already done, and those involved are made up of loyalists and allies and former Trump officials. And look, even 2 years ago, Trump was at a heritage event, and he told the group that their work was going to be essential going forward.
So Trump keeps distancing himself, as it were, to imply.
Well, I mean, it is true that this is not Trump's plan, but it is a plan for Trump. I mean, one way I look at it is it's taking Trump's policy goals that he talks about on the stump all the time and creates a legal roadmap to execute them. But you are right that the denials, they didn't seem to temper expectations. In fact, they seem to have fueled attention. You know, Democratic strategists argue that public awareness of Project 2025 has actually only increased in recent months, as he's been talking about.
Trump says this is not his plan, but he does have a plan. He's actually named a transition team.
Yeah, he announced 2 chairs. They include Linda McMahon, a major donor and an executive who founded World Wrestling Entertainment with her husband. She was also in the administration. Howard Lutnick is the other. He is chairman, or was chairman, of Cantor Fitzgerald, a financial services firm. You know, it is notable that neither have ties to Project 2025. McMahon's appointment, though, actually also adds emphasis to the work of another group, America First Policy Institute, that I am told is very involved in some of the transition work. She is on the board. But seeing how Heritage got on the wrong side of Trump, America First Policy Institute is being very careful not to do anything to antagonize Trump.
And here's Franco doing this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The State Fair of Texas will welcome fairgoers later this month. There will be a host of new fried delicacies and a major new rule: no guns. The new policy was prompted by a shooting that injured 3 people at the fair last year, but Texas's Republican Attorney General is suing the fair and the city of Dallas to reverse the ban. Toluwani Osibamo with member station KERA has our story.
In Texas, if you're 21 or older, you can openly carry a handgun in most public places with or without a license to carry. State law also says governments cannot ban licensed gun owners from carrying open or concealed handguns on government-owned or leased property. The only exceptions are certain gun-free zones, including schools and courthouses. The city of Dallas owns the fairgrounds and leases it to fair organizers for the annual event, but the State Fair Organization is its own private nonprofit business. Fair spokeswoman Carissa Condoyanis says organizers are legally allowed to ban guns on fairgrounds.
We are not a government entity, nor are we controlled by a government entity.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton says Dallas is responsible for the state fair's gun ban because it's taking effect on city property that's being leased. That's why he says the new policy is unlawful and that both the fair and Dallas are responsible. Dallas officials say they were involved in the state fair's gun ban and they shouldn't be sued. A city councilman called the lawsuit political posturing and a waste of taxpayer resources. David Cole is a Dallas attorney. He says Texas law doesn't clearly define who may be responsible for banning guns in this case, the government that owns the property or the private business leasing it.
And there is room for a variety of congressional members. Mr. Paxton certainly want to commit saying, no, no, no. We've seen one temporary hold to an own property, and these rights are really important. You shouldn't be able to just sign a piece of paper that gives it away.
Gun rights groups also criticize the fair's gun ban. They say gun-free zones are more susceptible to crime as they present less of a threat to attackers. The University of Houston's Miriam Holtman, who studies gun policy, says that idea has been disproven.
The idea that there's going to be some good guy with a gun that's going to come in and save all of us from a bad guy with a gun, no, the evidence would not suggest that that's going to happen.
Attorney General Paxton is asking for an injunction on the ban before the fair opens September 27th. For NPR News, Lucy Mamma in Dallas.
The Olympic marathon runner Rebecca Cheptegei of Uganda has died days after being set on fire in an alleged attack by her former boyfriend at her home in Kenya. Hospital authorities there say she had suffered burns to 80% of her body. Emmanuel Igunza reports from Nairobi.
The standard weeping mother of Rebecca Cheptegei shares the news of her daughter's death. She was a good child, very polite. Agnes Cheptegei tells reporters she didn't have any
environment that she went through is definitely not a very happy one. And that is why we are condemning this particular issue.
Only last month, the 33-year-old athlete had competed in the Paris Olympics, finishing 44th in the women's marathon race. Her father said her performance there was affected by the stress of the constant threats she was allegedly receiving from her former partner. She's the third top athlete to be killed in Kenya in the last 3 years. In 2021, long-distance Olympic runner Agnes Tirop was found stabbed at her home in Iten near Eldoret town. Her husband is on trial for her killing. And in 2022, Kenyan-born Bahraini athlete Damaris Muthee was strangled at her home.
The death of Cheptegei after an alleged domestic crime attack has dominated the headlines beyond the sports fraternity for the past 4 days.
Sports journalist Lynn Washira says the murders have reignited concerns over violence against women in Kenya.
The message is simple. This has got to stop. It's one too many deaths involving female athletes in the hands of their partners.
In January this year, thousands of women marched across Kenya to denounce rising cases of femicide and violence against women. Stop killing us, their banners read. In that month alone, over 20 women were murdered, according to local NGOs. But many of them go unreported. For MPR News, I'm Emmanuel Igunza in Nairobi, Kenya.
And in Houston at 6:18 on All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 88.7. 85 Fahrenheit, 29 Celsius right now here at the UH campus. I'm Dave Pepin. We have a pair of problems right now on the North Freeway, northbound Wreck at Mount Houston, southbound Wreck at Little York, and southbound 45 Gulf Freeway before El Dorado. Van Wreck is clear.
PBS NewsHour.
Now more than ever, you need news you can trust.
PBS NewsHour.
Unbiased, in-depth news that delivers substance over sensationalism.
PBS NewsHour.
Cutting through the noise with news that matters. World-class journalism that brings unrivaled national and global perspective home to you.
PBS NewsHour.
Elections, conflict, climate. Trust a news source that provides fair, thoughtful coverage of the events that impact our lives.
PBS NewsHour. Weeknights at 6 on Houston Public Media, TV8.
If one person in a relationship holds the purse strings tightly and the other wants to spend freely, can they coexist?
When one extreme encounters someone else with the same orientation, it can be a little off-putting at first. And so that's why we think that time wants to spend purse really hit it off right away.
How partners can get on the same page when it comes to money. That's next time on Think.
Tonight at 10.
Support comes from Comcast Business. From Main Street to Wall Street, Comcast Business provides business solutions ranging from cybersecurity solutions to round-the-clock partnership, powering possibilities. Restrictions apply.
Support comes from the Dan L. Duncan Comprehensive Cancer Center at Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center, offering comprehensive cancer care that is compassionate, personalized, and driven by clinical research. More at stlukeshealth.org/cancer.
Support comes from the 2024-2025 Imprint Margaret Wood Brown Reading Series, featuring Richard Powers, Yuri Herrera, Karen Russell, and others. Season tickets and full lineup at imprint.org. Houston Public Media presents the Moth Story Slam, September 10th at Warehouse Live Midtown. Doors open at 7 p.m. The theme of the night is elbow grease. Stories about rolling up your sleeves. Tickets at houstonpublicmedia.org/the Moth. Support for NPR comes from the station and from Raymond James, a firm focused on transforming lives, businesses, and communities through tailored wealth management, banking, and capital market solutions. Disclosures at raymondjames.com. From American Jewish World Service, supporting human rights advocates worldwide in the fight for democracy, equity, and justice for all people. Learn more at ajws.org. And from ECMC Foundation at ecmcfoundation.org.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. For Palestinians living in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, water has been a struggle for years. But since Israel's war with Gaza began in October of last year, it's been even harder to come by. In rural areas, freshwater springs are being taken over by hardline Israeli settlers, while many Palestinians living in cities say that tap water now flows much less frequently, sometimes just once a month. As NPR's Kat Lonsdorf reports, it is one of the less obvious ways life has become more difficult for Palestinians in the West Bank.
Young boys splash and jump in the Aluja Spring near Jericho. It's a hot summer day, nearly 100 degrees, and the sun beats off the dusty landscape of the Jordan Valley. Nearby, 24-year-old Mansour Arara sits with friends in the shade of a tree, keeping an eye on the boys. We were so happy to get here today and not get stopped by the soldiers, he says. He says this is the fourth spring they tried today. The other three were blocked by Israeli settlers with the help of the Israeli military. He says they've tried to come to this spring on other days, and Israeli soldiers blocked them, telling them that since October 7th, when the Hamas-led attack on Israel sparked the current war in Gaza, they were now forbidden from coming here. Meanwhile, he could see Israeli settlers using it. A few months ago, settlers established a new outpost just a few hundred feet from this spring. It's illegal under both Israeli and international law, but increasingly common.
I think within a year, it might just be totally off limits to Palestinians.
That's Sarit Mihaly of Betzel, an Israeli human rights organization that tracks abuses in the West Bank. She visits the Al-Hujah Spring often. In the weeks since NPR was there, she says settlers have encroached even further. The spring isn't just for cooling off during hot summer days. It's a vital water source to the nearby Palestinian towns, farms, and sheep herders. Settlers taking over water sources isn't a new phenomenon, but it has increased dramatically since the war began. Dozens of new settler outposts like the one near Al-Hujah have been built since then, often near or around natural water sources traditionally used by Palestinians. And Mihaly says it's not random.
It's not some sort of coincidence. It's done deliberately in order to take over land. The settlers talk about it openly. They make videos about it. None of it is a secret. It's done in both financial support and also security support of all aspects, all parts of the Israeli government and Israeli authorities.
Israeli government policy in the West Bank, bolstered by ultra-nationalist lawmakers who have become powerful in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government, encourages the expansion of illegal settlements and instructs the Israeli police and military to protect them. 70-year-old Samhen Shrete welcomes us into his home in the town of Mazra'a al-Qarbiyya on the other side of the West Bank. His daughter pours us water from a plastic bottle. He tells us that for as long as he can remember, every morning he would go to the water spring nearby to get water for his family. But on October 8th, the day after the war started, he says settlers were blocking it. They had guns. They threatened to shoot him. He says he thought they would kill him. He hasn't been back since, but he gets close enough to see that they're still there guarding the water. Losing access to that nearby spring meant Shrete's family now has to rely on water from their pipes, something that was already unreliable before October 7th, but now has become even more so. On this day, the taps are dry. He says there hasn't been water for 20 days. So he has to buy water from a water delivery service. He shows us how they store it in tanks and buckets outside the house. He says he's paying 5 times as much for water as he did before October 7th. And they ration water like never before. Laundry only once a week, limited showers and cleaning, watering the garden only when necessary. In the distance is the established Israeli settlement of Harshan. You can hear the steady hammer of construction as it's being expanded. Shrete points. Look, they're building and we can't even access our land, he says. And they have water 24 hours a day, he adds. In the established Israeli settlements, also illegal under international law, the taps don't run dry. That's largely because they're connected into the Israeli water grid. Palestinian cities and towns are not. Interim peace accords back in the 1990s, which were only supposed to last 5 years but are still in effect today, gave Israel control over 80% of the West Bank's water reserves. The allocations in the agreements just aren't enough water for the Palestinians, especially as the population has nearly doubled in the past 30 years. This forces the Palestinian Authority to purchase water from Israel. And Palestinians need Israel's permission for virtually any building, meaning that the Palestinian Authority cannot build a cohesive water grid in the West Bank or even repair leaky pipelines. All of this has caused a major disparity. A study published by B'Tselem last year found that Israeli settlers on average use 3 times as much water as Palestinians in the West Bank. But since October 7th, Palestinians say it's gotten worse.
What we feel is, of course, yes, there is much less water.
Weiss walks in and buys 3. He already has 2 tanks at home. That was enough in past years, but this year he needs more. The water comes so infrequently.
Oh yeah, this year is much worse. This year, once a week we get the water, 3-4 hours, and that's it.
Weiss is Palestinian-American, born and raised in Cleveland, but he moved back here with his kids in 2013.
Definitely after October 7th, the water decreased a lot. We noticed that. Not just me, everybody, the whole neighborhood,
It's not just the tanks he has to buy to make up for it. He's bought a pump and other infrastructure. It costs a lot.
At least $1,000.
He says he's lucky he can afford it. He knows a lot of people here can't. Ham Nasser owns a shop in downtown Ramallah selling awnings. He lives in a village outside of town. His family hasn't had running water in 1 month, he says. I ask him, what does he do? We wait for God's relief, he says. He worries that in the future there will be no water for them at all. And then but people are dying in Gaza, he says, so let them cut our water. That's a sentiment you hear a lot from Palestinians in the West Bank since the war began. As difficult as life gets, at least it's not Gaza. Pat Lonsdorf, NPR News, Ramallah.
It's 6:29, and you've been listening to All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 88.7 Marketplace.
There's more to the story at HoustonPublicMedia.org. From in-depth coverage of issues affecting all Texans to informing you about the latest breaking news, we prioritize exceptional reporting that's always available on your favorite device. Join us daily for political news that puts substance over sensationalism and community news that shines a light on voices across Houston and beyond. Anytime, anywhere, there's always more to the story at HoustonPublicMedia.org.
Support comes from the University of Houston downtown, presenting jazz artist, trumpeter, and Grammy Award winner Terrence Blanchard live for UHD, November 9th at Cullen Performance Hall. Tickets at uhd.edu. Support comes from Specs Wine, Spirits, and Finer Foods, Texas family-owned and operated since 1962, offering a large selection of wines, spirits, and beers to choose from. Details at specsonline.com. The fun starts here.
2 earlier wrecks on 45 North Freeway, southbound of Middle York and northbound of Mount Houston have been cleared. And 6:30.
Marketplace is supported by Betterment, the automated investing platform that helps make it easy to be invested. Learn more at betterment.com. Investing involves risk.
We'll start the show by taking the temperature on jobs, straight from some people who do lots of hiring. And we'll end with a nice cold glass of lemonade. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by the Pissarro Center for Financial Markets and Policy at Georgetown University. Their Financial Markets Quality Conference will feature financial leaders and policymakers on September 17th. And by GitLab. More than 50% of the Fortune 100 rely on GitLab to develop, secure, and deploy software faster. More at GitLab.com.
applicants have been showing up when he posts a job. Meanwhile, he's focused on making sure his current employees want to stay on board. That means trying to help them find affordable housing in a tough market. Also, keeping his wages competitive.
We've made 3 fairly significant increases in our pay scale in the last 4 years, and we feel that we probably need to do that again pretty soon.
At some small businesses, the job market is a non-issue.
We're pretty much staffed to capacity at the moment.
That's Chris Dwall, general manager of Hawaii Supermarket near Los Angeles. He says grocery sales have been sluggish this year, so instead of hiring new staff, he's focused more on working with his suppliers to keep his prices down.
We would rather err on the safe side and just kind of buckle down and work with what we have than trying to hire more and not be able to sustain the new hires that we bring on.
Meanwhile, in Oceanside, California, Jenny Nisgoda has been running her market and catering business called Alfresco solo.
You know, it's just like me working triple the hours, staying open, you know, from like 11 in the morning till like 10 p.m. at night.
Nisgoda says she can't afford to hire anyone else. The whole situation has not been easy.
I just kind of have, you know, I wouldn't call it a meltdown, but I think we all have our moments as entrepreneurs where you're like, can I keep going?
Nisgoda hasn't given up. Next month, she's launching a wine subscription service. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
Wall Street today waffled as it waits for tomorrow's jobs report. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. Next Tuesday will be the first time Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump debate each other. The state of the economy will certainly be an important topic. Also, relatedly, immigration and the unprecedented number of migrants who've arrived at the southern border in recent years. The Congressional Budget Office says 3.3 million people came to the U.S. last year, many of them undocumented, and it expects about the same number to enter the country this year. That compares to less than 1 million a year on average in the 2010s. Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman reports on the economic impact of new immigrants' hunt for housing and jobs.
Border states like Texas have had to shoulder the brunt of costs from migrants crossing into the United States.
The influx of immigrants, primarily from Central America, has clearly created a lot of logistical and infrastructure challenges, particularly some of the smaller cities along Eagle Pass or Del Rio.
Texas-based economist Ray Perryman points out the state has more than 5 million immigrants, about 1.5 million of them undocumented. He says their labor is crucial, but there's definitely a short-term burden from recent arrivals.
Those sheer numbers do create some economic problems for how you house people, how you feed people, how you provide health care for people to the border communities, and of course Texas has transported some of these folks to other places.
Like New York. Some have ended up in Buffalo, where new arrivals from Latin America have joined more established refugee and immigrant populations from Ukraine, Afghanistan, Somalia, Bangladesh, says Rob Latast at Invest Buffalo Niagara.
A lot of the jobs that our refugee community is taking are more of the entry-level manufacturing, healthcare that the employer has not been able to fill with the typical talent pipeline that we have in town.
But what about the idea that immigrants, legal and undocumented, will accept lower wages and take jobs from native-born Americans?
I think people are reasonable to think that there is competition with immigrants on any given afternoon. There's a certain number of jobs available, and immigrants might be competitors.
But economist Michael Clemens with the Peterson Institute for International Economics says the economy's not a zero-sum game. When an immigrant gets a job, that doesn't mean a native-born worker loses one.
Jobs ultimately come from economic growth, and new people joining the American economy are a cornerstone of economic growth.
We've had 3% real GDP growth, which is extraordinary for this stage of a business cycle.
Harvard economist Jason Furman chaired the White House Council of Economic Advisors in the Obama administration.
We've been adding more than 200,000 jobs a month on average. That's way higher than anyone thought could be sustained. A lot of the job increase has been in undocumented workers. It could never have happened without a large inflow of immigrants.
The Congressional Budget Office predicts that by 2034, new immigrant workers will add more than $1 trillion a year to GDP. But some economic studies have suggested they can also harm lower-skilled native-born workers, says University of Maryland economist Peter Morisi.
In some situations, adding immigrants might, suppress wages a lot. But right now, we have such a labor shortage for restaurants and so forth that I doubt that closing the shortage is going to have much effect.
In Texas, Ray Perryman has studied the construction industry, where 30 to 40% of workers are undocumented. He says there's little evidence they undermine native-born workers.
The wage structure is pretty much the same. Many of them pay Social Security and payroll taxes that, of course, you'll never be able to obtain the benefits from, and it helps the government.
Another economic boost happens right away. Immigrants become American consumers. Durgam Al-Yassiri, now a bank program manager, arrived in Buffalo as a refugee from Iraq at age 15. It was October 2006. The family was on public assistance. No one spoke English, and
within the first few weeks, the worst snowstorm in 50 years.
Other refugee families had offered key retail advice.
Don't buy any winter clothes yet, because there is this magical day in America where everything is 50% off. That day was Thanksgiving, Black Friday.
So they had nothing warm for the October blizzard.
Just running shoes in waist-high snow. I'll tell you, my mom was ready to pack up and leave.
Instead, they went shopping. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
School is officially back in session, and with a fresh new class of students entering college and grad school comes a fresh new batch of student loans. The total amount of outstanding student loan debt in this country is over $1.7 trillion. That, of course, includes lots of people who've already graduated, and some of them are facing a lot of uncertainty right now. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has temporarily blocked a new program by the Biden administration that would reduce monthly payments for many borrowers to just 5% of their income. Marketplace's Samantha Fields has more on what this means for borrowers as the program winds its way through the courts.
Around this time last year, the Biden administration rolled out something called the SAVE plan. It was designed to be the most affordable repayment plan ever for people with student loans. When Aaron Reichlin-Melnick heard about it, he figured, why not sign up if it would lower his monthly payment?
I have been paying my student loans for years.
Reichlin-Melnick is a lawyer at an immigration rights nonprofit in D.C., and anyone who works at a nonprofit is eligible to have their loans forgiven after making payments for 10 years through a program that's been around for a long time called Public Service Loan Forgiveness.
I am 4 months away from reaching my 10 years after which my student loans are going to be forgiven. However, right now I am unable to pay my student loans.
He's unable to pay because his loans were put into forbearance while the lawsuits over the SAVE plan are ongoing. Mike Pierce at the nonprofit Student Borrower Protection Center says the administration put 8 million borrowers into forbearance.
They basically paused their payments, and they're not charging them interest either. For most people who are just trying to make their ends meet every month, this is a pretty good deal.
But for people like Reichlin-Melnick who work in public service, it's not such a good deal.
Because right now, those months are not counting towards public service loan forgiveness. That means those borrowers will be in debt longer.
It also means they're stuck working in a nonprofit job until they're able to finish making payments. And if they get laid off, they could lose the chance for loan forgiveness. They also can't switch into another kind of income-driven repayment plan right now either. Mark Donnell tried calling to ask. His wife is a longtime public school teacher in Springfield, Missouri, and she's also tantalizingly close to getting her loans forgiven.
So we're like 4 payments shy, and everything is now frozen. So we're basically just stuck in limbo.
They have no idea how long that will be the case.
It's very much a mess for borrowers.
Adam Minsky, a lawyer who specializes in student loans, says it could be months because the legal challenges are likely headed for the Supreme Court.
And even a fast-track Supreme Court decision may not come out until next summer.
Which means millions of borrowers could be looking at nearly a year in limbo. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
127. And the S&P 500 shed 16.3% to end at 5503. We just heard from Samantha Fields about federal student loans. Let's look at some private issuers of student loans. SoFi Technologies fell 2 9/10%. Navient lost 0.2%. The Biden administration is looking to block the merger of Japan's Nippon Steel with U.S. Steel, as first reported by the Washington Post. U.S. Steel gained 2%. Competitor Cleveland-Cliffs fell 3 7/10%. Bonds rose. The yield on the 10-year T-note fell to 3.72%. You're listening to Marketplace.
The Numbers is supported by Odoo.com, your entire business on one platform. Marketplace is supported by Babbel for Business. With over 13,000 hours of language courses, live instructor-led classes, and business-specific content, Babbel is helping companies break down language barriers and improve workplace safety. Learn more at babbelforbusiness.com. And by You.com, using artificial intelligence to power workplace productivity. AI agents help with research, multi-step problem solving, and content creation. You.com, AI for you, your team, and your business. YOU.com. And by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness and accelerating action on America's fiscal challenges to build a brighter economic future for the next generation. Learn more at pgpf.org.
At 6:45, it's News 88.7.
We have not seen Harris at this point issue sort of a comprehensive policy platform on immigration. But make no mistake, the few times this has come up, the emphasis has been on border security.
I'm Sabrina Tavernisi. That's today on The Daily from the New York Times.
It's coming your way next at 7 o'clock, followed by Today Explained at 7:30 on News 88.7.
Support comes from Texas Mutual, a workers' comp provider dedicated to supporting the state's businesses and all working Texans through safety-focused resources and annual programs. More at texasmutual.com/benefits.
And on freeways, got a problem on the South Loop, westbound direction of 610 at MLK Boulevard. They've got a wreck with only the right shoulder getting by. It's 6:46.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kristen Schwab. These days, batteries make the world go round. They're in our phones, our cars, and increasingly our electric grids. A report by the Energy Information Administration out today shows rapid growth in utility-scale battery energy storage as a source of electricity. Around 5 gigawatts have been added so far this year, out of about 21 gigawatts total. How exactly are these batteries being used? Marketplace's Elizabeth Troval has the story about the role of batteries in the energy transition.
Big batteries play 3 major roles on the electric grid, says Sam Huntington with S&P Global Commodity Insights. A flexibility role,
balancing second-to-second variations in the grid.
a reliability
picture a house in San Francisco. What do you see? Maybe an old Victorian painted a lovely pastel sitting on a hill? What I'm describing here are the Painted Ladies, ornately decorated houses all in a row that are famous for appearing in a bunch of movies, ads, and TV shows, including the opening credits of Full House. For the next installment of our series, Adventures in Housing, we look at how the Painted Ladies reflect San Francisco's economic history.
My name is Woody LaBounty. I'm the president and CEO of San Francisco Heritage. The row of Painted Ladies, to me, represents what San Francisco's ideal is. It's a place that loves and cherishes the past, and it's always looking to the future. San Francisco starts with the gold rush, 1849. The first houses you have here are very rustic. They're going to look like cabins, utilitarian. As the city gets more wealthy and has a larger middle class, then you start getting these imported Victorian styles, more and more opulent decorations on the facades, until it really reaches a height with what's called the Queen Anne style. And essentially these are houses that are built with redwood, which was very plentiful in the 19th century, and through technologies of millwork, they have a lot of what's called gingerbread on them. Scrolls, fans, cherubs, anything to really sort of gussy up the front of a building. A contractor, a builder named Matthew Cavanaugh, built a row of these on a hillside called on Steiner Street today, across from Alamo Square Park. That block, those, quote, painted ladies there, provides an excellent photo opportunity because you can see this row of the past, these 1890s houses, and in the background, San Francisco's modern skyline. The first people to live in that row would have been middle-class workers. They would have been clerks. They would have been small business owners, not particularly wealthy. Over the years, as the population changed here, these houses would often be split up into rooming houses. But today, most of them have been restored and are just beautiful showplace homes. If you want a painted lady, you're going to have to spend millions of dollars. Today I go, and it is a major tourist destination. Tour buses come and disgorge all these people who want to go up and take a picture of the painted ladies with the skyline in the background. It's got a coffee truck up there. They're used in guidebooks. Almost any sort of tourist pamphlet or handout or postcard shows this image. It's a great visual ambassador for the city of San Francisco.
That was San Francisco historian Woody LaBounty. You can ask us a question about housing history or tell us a housing story of your own at marketplace.org. Setting up a summer lemonade stand. Get some ingredients, get some neighborhood friends, and post up on the sidewalk selling some refreshing drinks. Well, what if I told you that lemonade stands have actually become a profitable business for adults? Washington Post senior video journalist Amber Ferguson looked into the trend. Amber, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So the first thought I had when I first saw this story was, do people really make money selling lemonade?
Oh, yes. It is actually really competitive to sell lemonade. I had no idea before I saw this really going viral on TikTok.
Wow. And how much money are people actually making?
Okay, so it ranges anywhere from $500 to $10,000 per event. And this is like super seasonal, obviously. So really, it depends on where you live in the country, but usually it starts around in May and then ends usually at the end of October, maybe the beginning of November, if it's still warm in your area. And these, I call them lemonade entrepreneurs. couple that paid off their wedding debt by selling lemonade, and they decided to leave their full-time jobs.
Well, before everybody listening to this decides to quit their jobs and sell lemonade, I assume it's not as easy as just, mixing water, sugar, and lemon juice. There are probably, as you mentioned, some uncertainties and lots of hard work involved.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the beauty of this is that, anyone can really do it, but it is a manual job. Like, you're on your feet for several hours a day in the hot sun because you need it. The sunnier it is, the hotter it is, the more money you're going to make. And, everyone I spoke to was in their 20s and 30s, and they said, younger people are looking for outlets that aren't drinking and alcohol specific. And they said they just found just a lot more kind of community that way. It's like they just had such a passion for lemonade. It's really like a joy to see.
Amber Ferguson is a senior video journalist at The Washington Post. Amber, thanks again for chatting.
Oh, thank you.
With Snapshot. Learn more about Snapshot at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Snapshot not available in California or from all agents. And by Bitwarden, a password manager for business designed to help turn end-of-year IT budgets into long-term enterprise security success. Learn more at bitwarden.com.
This final note on the way out today. There are lots of indicators out there that help us sort out what's going on in the world. And they come from all sorts of places, including, oddly, companies that make water coolers. Saw this in Business Insider. Bevi, which makes smart water coolers that measure how much water its machines dispense over time, Bevi says there's been an uptick in office attendance across every day of the week. Tuesday is the most popular day, and no surprise here, Friday is the least popular. Also, people are shifting their hours to start earlier or later than the traditional 9 a.m. time. John Buckley, John Gordon, Noya Carr, Diantha Parker, Amanda Peacher, and Stephanie Seek are the Marketplace editing staff. Amir Bibawi is the managing editor, and I'm Kristen Schwab. We'll be back tomorrow. This is APM.
It's a minute before 7 on the evening before Friday here on your NPR station, News 87. Final look at the drive home finds all main lanes blocked right now in the South Loop 610 westbound direction after MLK. You were getting by on the right shoulder, but momentarily everything is ground to a halt, and you'll be grinding to a halt as you approach Crestlawn.
Support comes from Comcast Business, partnering with companies to help keep their business moving by offering a network of cybersecurity solutions and round-the-clock support. Powering possibilities. Restrictions apply. ComcastBusiness.com.
We're about 40 minutes away from sunset. About a 40 to 50% chance of showers and storms overnight, kind of what we've had throughout the afternoon. Mostly cloudy otherwise, with a low around 76. Tomorrow sunrise at 7:01, some patchy morning fog, then about another 40 to 60% chance of rain, breezy, and a high near 85. Right now it is 85 and overcast here at the UH campus, and this is your NPR station, KUHF Houston, News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. It's 7 o'clock.
When the administration was faced with these tough questions about border crossings or about what the way forward was just for the overall immigration system, Harris has almost been shielded in a way by her limited role. If she were to win, she's going to be the person that's going to be making those decisions.
I'm Sabrina Tavernisi. That's coming up on The Daily from the New York Times.
The Daily is supported by JLL, committed to finding smarter ways to tackle business goals with commercial real estate solutions. Talent retention, hitting sustainability goals, or simply helping find the place for your business to grow. JLL.com. JLL, see a brighter way.
Listeners of The Daily, get to the heart of the stories shaping the world. For more on today's episode, go to nytimes.com/thedaily.
Live from NPR. defense. Another would extend a $300 tax credit for buying storage devices like gun safes. That tax credit passed the House but stalled in the Senate. Most Republicans, though, say they're focused on hardening schools. A new law requires schools to develop safety plans and conduct active shooter drills. For NPR News, I'm Sam Greenglass in Atlanta.
And tonight, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations has announced the gunman's father has been arrested. There's been questions over how the team was able to access the AR-style weapon used in the school shooting. Hunter Biden has pleaded guilty to tax crimes in federal court in California. That guilty plea came as a major surprise minutes before jury selection was set to begin. And here's Ryan Lucas has more.
The last-minute decision to change his plea to guilty came as a shock to prosecutors who learned of it in court. After hammering out the contours of the plea, U.S. District Judge Mark Scarzi asked Hunter Biden whether he committed every element of every crime charged in the indictment, to which the president's son replied yes. Then asked how he pleaded to each of the 9 counts. Biden said guilty. He is scheduled to be sentenced in December. In a statement, Hunter Biden said he didn't want to put his family through the pain and needless embarrassment that the trial would have caused them. His guilty plea comes 3 months after a jury in Delaware convicted him of federal gun charges. The sentencing in that case is scheduled for November. Ryan Lucas, NPR News, Los Angeles.
After months of deadlock following legislative elections, Michel Barnier's appointment as French Prime Minister isn't just drawing attention there. Across the English Channel, Barnier is better known as an opponent during Britain's exit from the European Union, known as Brexit. More from NPR's Lauren Freyer.
Michel Barnier used to be the European Union's chief Brexit negotiator, and as such, he was seen by some supporters of Brexit as an adversary. But a spokesperson for UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who voted to remain in the EU, says Starmer wishes Barnier all the best in his new role, and that the UK is committed to working collaboratively with him.
NPR's Lauren Freyer in London. Republican presidential hopeful Donald Trump told a group of New York business people today if he's put back in the Oval Office, he'll lead a national economic renaissance, slashing regulations and taxes for business, boosting energy production, and cutting government spending. Stocks continued to bounce around today. Dow closed down. This is NPR. A federal court judge in Atlanta is temporarily blocking the Biden administration's latest plans to put in place a student debt forgiveness plan. From the U.S. District Court judge coming just days after 7 Republican-led states filed a lawsuit seeking to halt it. The judge, in putting the hold in place, cited the likelihood of proving the Education Department lacked authority to cancel student loans under the plan. The loan debt relief measure, which had yet to be finalized, would have affected an estimated 27.6 million students, the cost of more than $146.9 billion. New government data shows e-cigarette use on the decline. The annual National Youth Tobacco Survey from the FDA and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention show e-cigarette use falling by 25%. And here's Yukinoguchi.
E-cigarettes came on the market more than a decade ago and took teenagers by storm. But almost as quickly, the trend is fading. New numbers show big drops in e-cigarette use, primarily among high schoolers. Since peaking in 2019, youth e-cigarette use has declined about 70%. Meanwhile, nicotine pouches, a trend drawing more attention recently, did not significantly increase over the past year. FDA officials say they nevertheless continue to monitor whether use will increase among young consumers. Yukinoguchi, NPR News.
President Biden was in southwest Wisconsin today, making good on a promise he made to provide additional federal dollars for rural electrification efforts. Biden was in the town of Westby, where he announced a $7.3 billion investment in 16 cooperatives that provide electricity. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Americans United for Separation of Church and State. For more than 75 years, AU has supported freedom without favor and equality without exception. Learn more at au.org/NPR.
From the New York Times, I'm Sabrina Tavernisi, and this is The Daily. As Vice President Kamala Harris moves into the final stretch of her campaign, one of the biggest issues for voters and for Republicans attacking her is the surge of migrants across the southern border over the past 4 years and her role in it. Today, I talked to my colleague Zolan Kano-Youngs about her record.
being given their full due process under law. But at the time, Harris said that this was necessary to maintain cooperation with federal law enforcement, and that a sanctuary city status didn't exactly mean that you would issue sort of blanket protection for undocumented immigrants that had committed crimes. That being said, her position and her approach was nuanced. She also worked within the law to also assist undocumented immigrants.
So how did she do that? Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, one way is she went after employers who she accused of abusing undocumented immigrants by not paying them adequate wages. She also supported issuing these sort of specialized visas for undocumented victims of violent crimes. And she denounced proposed federal legislation that would have criminalized assisting undocumented immigrants. So you are seeing somebody willing to pursue enforcement, but you're also seeing somebody that's willing to work within the law to provide some humanitarian relief to undocumented immigrants as well.
So, in other words, there are lots of sticks here. She's part of law enforcement, but when it comes to her approach to immigrants, there are carrots as well.
I think that's right, and that's the approach that she would try to own when she became the top law enforcement officer in the state, the Attorney General of California, a border state with some of the most undocumented immigrants in the country, no longer just DA of sort of liberal San Francisco, but now a large part of her responsibility was also how to approach immigration. So starting from about 2011, when she started her career as Attorney General, you saw Harris really start to focus on the border and some of the criminal gangs and cartel organizations that she would say were facilitating illegal crossings at the border and exploiting migrants at the time, analyzing different data trends and crimes committed by some of these transnational gangs and cartels. At one point, she led a delegation of other attorneys general to Mexico to learn more about cartels. So already you see somebody leaning into a law enforcement approach to tackle this issue.
Okay, so that's her California era. Then, of course, she's elected to the U.S. Senate, which happens in 2016, which is the same year that former President Trump wins the presidency. He, of course, kind of redefines the issue of immigration by coming up with policies that are pretty far to the right. How does she respond to that in her seat as senator?
Sure, let's just describe this moment that Harris is coming to Washington. In the Trump administration, in those early days, they were issuing a flurry of executive actions to change the way our immigration system worked. One of the more known examples were these travel bans that he issued, including travel bans against Muslim-majority countries, right? And I talked to some of the people who worked with Harris when she was a senator at the time, and they were saying, look, it was almost as soon as she got in, there was a need to now respond to some of these policies, utilize her connections in the legal world to pro-immigration advocates that she made connections with back in California, to work with them on opposing some of these policies. And then also publicly, she became someone that was sort of known, particularly in congressional testimonies of Trump administration officials, as somebody who would almost cross-examine some of his top immigration advisors.
So this was, of course, a period when the language we heard from Democrats became pretty limited to combating Trump in all of his border policies, which, of course, brings us to the primary campaign in 2019 and Harris's run for president.
Yeah, I mean, look, Democrats during the Trump era were on the defensive. And in that time period, so many Democrats, including Harris, spent so much time investigating, criticizing, calling to question the Trump administration's approach to immigration. That sort of grew to define the overall rhetoric from Democrats on immigration, essentially not being Trump. And that carried over as well to the presidential elections when it came to the different campaign platforms for each candidate. You know, Democrats at that time in 2019 and going into the 2020 election, most of the time they spent their time basically saying how they would roll back Trump-era policies or not do what he did. But there was a question about what they would do. And in some cases, they moved even further to the left than we've seen Democrats historically go on the border and immigration.
Also immediately put in place
the opportunity to ask for protection in the U.S. You see her even at one point express support for decriminalizing border crossings.
Let me just be very clear. We have to have a secure border, but I am in favor of saying that we're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct.
You see her saying that ICE might need to be overhauled as well.
Listen, I think there's no question that we've got to critically re-examine ICE and its role and the way that it is being administered and the work it is doing, and we need to probably think about starting from scratch.
Right, she took on these very pro-immigration stances as a primary candidate.
Right, but as we know, Harris's presidential campaign didn't last too long. She dropped out pretty early on, and she would later be picked as Biden's running mate. And after coming into office, President Biden took a more hardline approach at the border than Democrats in modern history have taken. And his vice president went right along with him.
The Daily is supported by Seed. Seed's DS-01 is a 24-strain 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic engineered to survive digestion, support healthy regularity, and promote whole body health. Learn more at seed.com/public.
Rigorous reporting told through a human lens. Go deeper into the most important stories of the day with The Daily, an audio series from the New York Times. Distribution of The Daily is made possible by American Public Media. APM produces and distributes programs that entertain and engage audiences everywhere.
This is News 88.7.
There's a new video game in the Star Wars franchise, which has been having a rough ride on the gaming front. Star Wars Outlaw looks great. It's got an appealing protagonist and offers a full immersion in the Star Wars universe. But how does it play? We put you in the gaming chair and ask, should you play it? That's this week on Day 6.
Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock and Sunday morning at 11 right here on News 88.7.
If you took part in our recent fundraiser, take an extra step to have your donation matched. Current and retired employees may be eligible for an employee matching program. Visit houstonpublicmedia.org/match to search for your company. Support comes from Moody Center for the Arts, hosting the opening reception of In Process, an exploration of the methodologies, research, and collaborative projects of Korean artist Do-Ho Seo. 6 p.m. September 6th, moody.rice.edu.
Zolan Kano-Youngs on Kamala Harris's record on immigration. Okay, so Harris becomes vice president and kind of takes up the party line of the Biden administration on immigration. We know she had some role related to immigration in her job as vice president. What did she actually do?
Yeah, so the vice president had a pretty specific role when it comes to this issue. For one, I think it's worth saying that it wasn't like the vice president is the one who is deciding or shaping even the specific way to handle asylum seekers at the U.S.-Mexico border. She's not dictating border policy like at the actual U.S.-Mexico border. That's the Homeland Security Secretary. That's not going to be the vice president's role. What her role was essentially addressing the poverty and the corruption in what's known as the Northern Triangle of Central America. We're talking about Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, and these countries for years had made up many, at times the majority of migrants who were crossing the border into the United States. So her team describes this as addressing the root causes of migration, the sort of societal, systemic factors of poverty and violence that were pushing people to get up and take that dangerous journey to the United States.
Okay, so she's tasked with this root causes mission. How does she tackle that?
So there's kind of a two-part strategy to this role. You know, one is that she's tasked with bolstering democratic institutions in this region. So what does that mean? That's pressing leaders to ensure a free and fair election, right? Making sure that those who are fair
bring down immigration levels?
Yeah, the short answer is we really won't know for years. When I've talked to business leaders that worked on this initiative, they told me and were clear on it that this was going to take as long as maybe a decade, definitely not within one presidential term, to see its full results. And that speaks to just how daunting of a task this is. I mean, I went on that first trip in 2021 with Harris to Guatemala. And actually, before she arrived, I got there before her and went to this rural village in Huehuetenango in northern Guatemala, where there were plenty of families that had relatives that had made that trip to the United States. And I asked them, was this initiative, the vice president's involvement, encourage you to stay home? And they explained that their families for generations had traveled to the U.S. and found a way to support their families. That's sort of the generational cycle that you're going up against here if you're Kamala Harris. So it was quite a daunting task.
Right.
But it also was at a time of sort of a global migration trend, a shift in global migration, where we had more migrants coming from different parts of South America as far as Africa and China. Meanwhile, this strategy remained focused on the northern triangle. So there was also some criticism that it was slow to adapt in a way.
So basically, Harris did a fine job of the task she was asked to do, but it's just that that task was never going to be all that meaningful to the overall problem of too many migrants trying to cross into the United States.
Yeah, on its own, Harris's task was not going to be the sort of primary policy response to the soaring number, the record number of illegal crossings that we saw in the short term. But that being said, Harris was still a part of this administration. She was still the number two, Biden's number two, when there were unaccompanied children and teenagers crossing in mass, encountering squalid border detention facilities in 2021, and rising all the way towards this past year, where in December of 2023, remember, we were getting 10,000 crossings a day.
Huge.
The border and the administration's handling of immigration became a top concern for voters, and you saw the Biden White House also respond to that pendulum shift, even working with a group of conservative Republicans in the Senate to draft a Senate bill that would severely restrict asylum at the southwest border.
And we know, of course, the fate of that legislation. It dies. It's torpedoed by former President Trump.
Yep, former President Trump did not want the White House to get this election year victory, which is how many saw it. So Trump torpedoes it, and then we see the White House take action on their own and issue this executive order that is still in place today that did many of the things that that Senate bill would do, namely restricting asylum, restricting the ability for migrants to claim asylum, to get protection, to stay in the United States. And look, you know, since that executive order was signed, we've seen border crossings plummet. I mean, that could be for a variety of reasons, but without a doubt, since President Biden, since the Biden White House issued this executive order, you've seen border crossings plummet.
Okay, so Harris inherits all of this once she becomes the nominee. But since that time, she really hasn't laid out a policy plan on the issue or given us a lot of detail about how she's thinking about it. Are we to assume that her campaign approach is just basically what he said? You know, like agreeing wholesale with Biden's policy?
Yeah, you're totally right. We have not seen Harris at this point issue sort of a comprehensive policy platform on immigration. But make no mistake, the few times this has come up, the emphasis has been on border security. It has been on sort of describing herself as the one person in the election that actually has investigated transnational criminal organizations, cartel organizations. It's been talking about her time as a prosecutor.
On the border, the choice is simple. Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents.
Democrats even issued an advertisement for Harris.
Donald Trump blocked a bill to increase the number of Border Patrol agents,
in which they talked about that Senate bill that Trump torpedoed. So, you know, you're not seeing her talk about it all the time, but the few times that she does talk about it, there's a similar sort of emphasis on what we were hearing from President Biden.
So, what do you think she would actually do if she wins? Would a Harris White House just be Biden 2.0?
fits easily into a bucket. She's somebody that her aides have said when it comes to each policy, and I think including immigration, wants to lean into the nuance and also wants to be pragmatic and not worry about being described as pro-immigration or pro-enforcement or what have you. I mean, make no mistake about it, this is still a primary vulnerability for Democrats. After consecutive years of overseeing a record level of border crossings, we know this is something that Republicans will continue to attack her and Democrats in general on. What we do know, though, is that going into Election Day, in a potential Harris administration, she would be the person now faced with these questions. Throughout the Biden era, Harris has almost been shielded in a way by her limited role. When the administration was faced with these tough questions about border crossings or about what the way forward was just for the overall immigration system, including the legal immigration system, Kamala Harris was able to say, I have a very sort of specific lane, a very specific piece of this overall puzzle. Well, now the entire puzzle is going to be yours if you're president. And all of those questions about the border, how you're deciding who gets in and who stays out, and also just what the future is for this country when it comes to immigration. If she were to win, she's going to be the person that's going to be making those decisions.
She can no longer say, that's not my job.
That's right. She will no longer be able to say that this assignment, this issue, is not her job.
Zolan, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Zolan Kano-Youngs covers the White House for the New York Times.
The Daily is supported by Progressive Insurance. On the road and at home, customers can simplify their insurance needs and protect what's important by bundling home and auto with Progressive Insurance. Learn more about Progressive and bundling at progressive.com. For everything you need to know about the most important stories of the day, you're listening to The Daily from the New York Times, distributed by American Public Media. APM produces and distributes programs that entertain and engage audiences everywhere.
The Daily is powered by the journalism of the New York Times and is distributed by APM, American Public Media. You can go deeper into the stories you hear on The Daily by going to nytimes.com/The Daily. That's it for The Daily. I'm Sabrina Tavarese. See you tomorrow.
PBS NewsHour.
Now more than ever, you need news you can trust.
PBS NewsHour.
Unbiased, in-depth news that delivers substance over sensationalism.
PBS NewsHour.
Cutting through the noise with news that matters. World-class journalism that brings unrivaled national and global perspective home to you.
PBS NewsHour.
Elections, conflict, climate. Trust a news source that provides fair, thoughtful coverage of the events that impact our lives.
PBS NewsHour. Weeknights at 6 on Houston Public Media TV 8.
If you don't mind, I kind of want to just read the number of countries that we have important sanctions on. We currently have major sanctions on Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Syria, Cuba, Yemen, Afghanistan, Russia, China, Myanmar, Libya, Sudan, Belarus, Lebanon, Mali, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Nicaragua, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that is a partial list.
And it's better than going to war. That's the case for sanctions. The problem is people pay attention to wars. They don't really pay attention to sanctions.
The United States is currently engaged in a massive economic war across dozens of countries that we are unaware of, the collateral damage of which is far greater than most people, even in the U.S. government, are aware of.
In a few months, a Harris or a Trump administration will have the chance to reverse a mountain of American sanctions. And coming up on Today Explained, we're going to have an argument that whoever is elected maybe should.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. One day after a mass shooting at a high school in Georgia, the father of the 14-year-old suspect has also been arrested on charges including second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. Meanwhile, students are speaking out about the attack that left 4 people dead and 9 others injured at Appalachia High, about 50 miles east of Atlanta. One of those teachers also coached football. 17-year-old Stephanie Reyna described describes what they were hearing when the initial gunshots went off.
We were just in class doing our regular thing, and all of a sudden we heard banging on the lockers right outside the classroom door. And my teacher, Coach Aspinwall, he opened the door and he ran outside to see what was going on.
Authorities say the 14-year-old suspect denied threatening to carry out a school shooting more than a year ago. Received the gun as a gift months later from his father. The State Department is slapping sanctions on two companies the U.S. says are exporting liquefied natural gas from Russia. NPR's Jackie Northam has the story.
The sanctions target LNG exports from Arctic LNG 2, a massive flagship project in the high north that Russia had hoped would triple its global market share by the end of this decade. But those plans have been hobbled by U.S. and G7 sanctions, which ban new investments in the project and re-exports of Russian LNG. Those sanctions scared away many customers, and Russia has taken to using floating storage units and so-called dark fleets, vessels that are willing to bust sanctions. The State Department targeted two such LNG carriers, New Energy and Pioneer, as well as the registered owners, Gotek Energy Shipping Company and Pleo Energy Cargo Shipping. Jackie Northam, NPR News.
A mixed day of trading on Wall Street. This is NPR. Volunteers in New York's Adirondack and Catskill Mountains are marking the end of summer by lighting the historic fire towers that once kept watch over the region's forests. NPR's Brian Mann has more.
After hiking a rocky trail to the summit of Goodnoe Mountain, Jake O'Connell prepares to illumine the 60-foot tower.
Got our good old school Coleman propane lantern, relatively bright, so this is how we've been doing it here.
In the dark on the mountain summit, the tower glows like a paper lantern. More than 24 fire towers across upstate New York were illuminated on a single night. O'Connell and other volunteers also read the name of the watchers who looked out for forest fires.
William Bailey would have been the first fire tower observer, followed by John Kays, George Shaughnessy.
New York's fire towers were all decommissioned starting in the 1980s as new technology and new firefighting techniques came in. But on this night, they glowed again in the darkness. The summer ends. Brian Mann, NPR News in upstate New York.
Here in Los Angeles, President Biden's son entered a surprise guilty plea today to federal tax charges. It comes months after Hunter Biden's conviction in a separate gun case. He said he wanted to spare his family another embarrassing criminal trial. He now faces the prospect of a lengthy prison term after being convicted in June on 3 felony gun charges. President Biden has repeatedly said he will not commute or pardon his son. This is NPR.
Houston Public Media appreciates the leadership and commitment to keeping this station strong for our community, serving one of the most dynamic areas in America, Greater Houston. This free access to trusted, independent journalism is powered by our members and listeners. We'd like to thank Judith and Mark Cook, Daryl and John Dunn, William Fagan, and Erica and Charles Harris. Thank you for making a difference.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from attorney mediator Ron Bankston, providing in-person, video conference, and hybrid mediation and arbitration services. More at ronbankston.com.
And support also comes from Comcast Business. From Main Street to Wall Street, Comcast Business provides business solutions ranging from cybersecurity solutions to round-the-clock partnership. Powering possibilities, restrictions apply.
It's Today Explained. Washington Post White House economics reporter Jeff Stein recently co-wrote The Money War. It's a big package of stories, thousands of words about sanctions. Why did Jeff do such a thing?
My reporting around this started because as part of IP, I covered the Treasury Department. And as a reporter on the Treasury team, I get their emails and newsletters. And what they send out is every entity that they've sanctioned, and it ends up in my inbox. And I was looking at my inbox, and it felt like almost every day I was getting another sanctions designation sent to me by the Treasury Department. That led me down this rabbit hole of, wait, how many countries, how many people, how many governments are that cost trillions of dollars. And after Iraq and Afghanistan, you saw real commitments from both parties to at least less obviously be involved in bloodshed abroad. And so you saw a move away from launching new invasions.
Mr. President, this war in Iraq has come at a very, very high price in so many ways.
After 9/11, the U.S. national security establishment had a really concerted push to figure out exactly how it was that Al-Qaeda had moved sort of narrowly target a key economic choke point. And for a lot of people at Treasury, that this was sort of a big success story. They were really kind of proud of this moment because it led North Korea to backing down and sort of furthered the thinking that sort of all of this new financial data that Treasury was suddenly able to have access to after 9/11 could be used to be more surgical about how to achieve U.S. foreign policy elsewhere in the world.
And how did it go?
You saw with each passing year, presidents increasingly be interested in this tool because it allows them to suggest that they're being tough without actually doing anything that they would see as too risky to their domestic political fortunes. And so by the time the Obama administration rolls around, you have huge new sanctions on Iran. You have sanctions spreading to Syria after the horrible civil war there. You have sanctions on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And then year after year, they just pile up to the point at which I reported in the story. There's a Christmas party, and the director of the office responsible for sanctions sang a song to the tune of the Police's Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic with the title Every Little Thing We Do Is Sanctions. The song recounted all the different sanctions programs that the Obama administration was pursuing.
Is that on tape anywhere?
I've been asking, and nobody has either shared with me or wanted to share with me.
Sanctions.
When we're back, Jeff's going to tell us what American sanctions can mean for Americans. A hint, have you been wondering about Venezuelan migrants lately? Stay tuned.
Today Explained is supported by Progressive Insurance. From the moment car insurance is quoted to the moment it's purchased, drivers can discover a variety of ways to stay protected. More at Progressive.com. Today Explained is supported by BetterHelp, committed to helping clients with issues ranging from relationship challenges and goal setting to grief and depression. Learn more at BetterHelp.com/public.
This is News 88.7.
There's more to the story at HoustonPublicMedia.org. From in-depth coverage of issues affecting all Texans to informing you about the latest breaking news, we prioritize exceptional reporting that's always available on your favorite device. Join us daily for political news that puts substance over sensationalism and community news that shines a light on voices across Houston and beyond. Anytime, anywhere, there's always more to the story at HoustonPublicMedia.org.
On the next Science Friday, there's a new type of ant in New York City, and scientists are learning how it's interacting with other urban insects.
So now we have this sort of mix of species from all over the world that are coming together, and I guess, much like humans, are sharing their culinary culture and exchanging foods.
A closer look at the Manhattan. That's on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
Tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock here on News 88.7.
It's Today Explained. We're back with the Washington Post's White House economics reporter, Jeff Stein. When we left off at a Christmas party during the Obama administration, the number of U.S. imposed sanctions had ballooned. And then,
So by the end of Obama's administration, there was already, this is about 10 years ago, there was already a growing recognition that this had already gotten out of control. The Treasury Secretary at the time was a guy named Jacob Lew, who's most famous for his indecipherable squiggly signature.
oh yeah,
And what Lew, in a more serious note, was pointing out was that the whole edifice of sanctions that had grown up under Bush and Obama, already by this point, Lew was seeing that in its rise, it contained sort of the seeds of its own demise and failure, which was that if sanctions were predicated on pushing people out of the Western financial system, if you did that enough times, what it would mean would be that there would be enough people outside of the financial system that they could form their own alternative banks that could compete and sort of exist independent of U.S. Western financial institutions, which would render the whole idea of sanctions effectively inert. And so on his way out of office, ahead of the Trump inauguration, Jack Lew gives a speech in which he says, hey, we gotta be really careful and strategic about not letting the use of this tool get out of control.
Today's economic tools are sophisticated and potent, but they're not the answer to every threat we face. To preserve the effectiveness of sanctions over the long term, we must use them wisely.
I used
like, okay, guys, we'll just do our own thing.
Yeah, especially if it's like the worst behaved kids in the class, right? Like they're more likely to get up to mischief, right? If you put them all together.
And to feel some cohesion